West, and in this video we're going to create print number 3. Now just like in all projects, we want to try to identify chamfers and fillets. Now looking, we can see that there's no chamfers here, but there are 4 fillets, and each one of these fillets has a radius of 0.5. So what we'll do is we'll create our primary shape first, and then we'll end by placing our fillets. Now if we look closely, we can see that these 2 arcs actually have their arc center at the very edges or corners of a theoretical rectangle. In fact, if we look at these circles as well, they also have their arc centers at the very corner or endpoints of a theoretical rectangle. So what I suggest we do is create a rectangle first, then we'll create these circles at the corners, and then we'll trim and then put our fillets in. Let's begin. I'm going to open up our layer browser and turn our blueprint off. And to create a rectangle, we know that the rectangle tool is located inside of line. So we'll select line and then rectangle. We don't want to put fillets on the 4 corners of the rectangle, so make sure this radius radio button is unchecked. We'll click OK, and for the first position of the rectangle we want to use a coordinate, so we'll select coordinate. That's going to be placed at x0, y0, and then we'll click OK. The second position, the opposing diagonal corner of our rectangle, we're also going to use coordinate for that. That's going to be placed at x 6.5, and the y value is going to be -3. Then we'll click OK to that. Now our rectangle is completed, so to terminate this dialog box you can click cancel or click the little X up there. I'm going to click cancel. The next thing we want to do is create the actual circles at the corners. Why don't we create these 2 circles first? Alright, now if I open up our blueprint, I believe those have a radius of 1 inch. So if we look down here we can see that this radius 1 inch, typical 2 places, so that's these 2 guys right here. So let's turn our blueprint layer off. We're going to head home, going to select arc, choose the very first command, and the radius is going to be 1 inch. We'll click OK to that. And now I want to place these circles at these endpoints. We could use coordinates, but why type in coordinates when we already have geometry that we can use? So let's use endpoint, and all you do is just take your cursor and snap where you want to create that arc. So I'm going to left click, I'm going to left click. Now I'm finished with this command, so I'm going to right click the mouse. You could also hit the escape key on the keyboard if you want. Now there's another arc in here that has a radius of 800 thousandths, so let's create that. We're going to select the arc tool. Let's change this radius to 0.8. We'll click OK to that. And now we have several options. We could use coordinate, we could use endpoint, or we could use arc center because there's already an arc there. I'm going to use arc center. I'm going to left click. I'm finished, so I'm going to right click. Now we need to create these 2 arcs, and I believe they have a radius of 1.25, but let's double check that. And sure enough, those both have radius of 1.25, so we're going to turn our blueprint layer off. Going to head here to arc, and the radius is going to be 1.25. We'll click OK, and I'm going to use endpoint again. So I'm going to left click and left click. Now I'm finished with the command, so I'm going to right click. So you can see now we very quickly have created our basic shapes. We have our rectangle in place, and we have all of our circles created as well. Alright, let's start trimming our part now. But before we do this, I want to remind you that all circles are created counterclockwise, and all circles start and terminate at 3 o'clock. If you remember this, it will certainly assist you when you start trimming. Alright, let's begin. I'm going to click home and then trim. Let's go with trim 2. And we're going to work with this circle in the lower right hand corner. I want to keep this portion of this line and this portion of the arc. Now notice how the arc terminates at 3 o'clock. That's because the arc started at 3 o'clock, counterclockwise stops. And we told 1CNC to keep this portion of the arc. So let's continue trimming. We're going to left click here and then left click right there. That looks great. Now let's work here in the upper left hand corner. I want to keep this portion of the line and this portion of the arc. Now when I do that, you might say, wait a second, it looks like 1CNC trimmed both all at the same time. In actuality, that's not the case. 1CNC trimmed down here, but the remainder of the arc stops at 3 o'clock, and that's why we have this. So let's continue trimming. I'm going to left click here and left click right there. And that looks great. Let's continue working with these 2 circles now. Alright, so what we're going to do is tell 1CNC we want to keep this portion of the horizontal line. Now what's interesting here is if I digitize this circle over here on the left, it's going to take this line and extend it all the way to the left, and I don't want that. And this is really something that you want to keep in mind when you're trimming. Let me give you an example. I'm going to digitize a circle over here, and sure enough, one CNC does exactly what we told it to do. All right. Now I don't want that, so to get rid of this, I'm just going to right click to exit out of the command and hit the undo button. I'm going to go back into trim. This time I'm going to say, okay, I want to digitize here, and I'm going to digitize the right side of the circle. So now I've got to trim from here to here. Now you might look at the circle and say, wait a second, it looks like it didn't trim at all. But remember, this circle starts and terminates at 3 o'clock. So there's nothing else really left to trim, at least in this location. It already has trimmed this horizontal line to the 3 o'clock location. Now let's trim up here. I want to keep this portion of the line. I don't want to trim the circle down here. I want to digitize the circle up here. And I want to keep the outside. I don't want to keep the inside. I want to keep the outside. That's why we end up with that. Alright, now let's trim over here. I want to keep this portion of the horizontal line, and I want to keep the left side of this circle. I don't want to digitize the right side, or it will take this line and extend it all the way to the right. So I'm going to left click there. Now what we want to do is take this circle and trim it to this line. Now remember, we need to digitize what we want to keep. I'm going to digitize the circle, and I don't want to digitize the line up here. I want to digitize it down low because I want to digitize what I want to keep. I don't want to keep anything up here, so I'm going to be really safe and just digitize down here. And you can see now that it's pulled the circle all the way around. Alright, now let's put our fillets. So let's hit the home button. We're going to go to Arc, and we're going to select Fillet. And now you don't have to do this, but I think this is just a habit for me, and that might be my experience with other CAM systems. But I always like to digitize my geometry counterclockwise when working with fillets. A lot of times it doesn't matter, but for safety, why not just adhere to that? Okay? So for my fillet, I'm going to digitize here and here. So I've digitized in a counterclockwise fashion. It's not necessarily something that you always have to do, but it's a nice, safe way to approach fillets. So I've got a 1/2 inch radius there. We'll click OK, and there's the fillet. Same thing here. I'm going to digitize here and here. You can see that's counterclockwise. And we'll click OK to that. Here and here. That's counterclockwise. Here and here. There's also a counterclockwise. We'll click OK to that. So there's our fillets. I'm going to terminate the command by right-clicking, and let's bring our blueprint up to see how our part looks against our geometry. And we can see that it looks like we did a pretty good job there. Alright, so the whole thrust behind this particular exercise was to learn how to trim circles and to realize that circles always are created counterclockwise and start and begin at 3 o'clock. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.